I was 9 years old, but I knew what silence meant. Not the peaceful kind, like when snow falls or the stars come out. No, the kind that stretches across the dinner table when you both know the fridge is almost empty and there's nothing more to say. That was our kind of silence. It was just Mom and me. Always had been. We lived in a tiny town tucked between cornfields and highways where neighbors waved, grocery stores closed early, and everyone knew who had what kind of trouble. Ours was money. Always money. Mom worked the early shift at a diner on Main Street, and sometimes picked up late shifts too, walking home past midnight with aching feet and her apron still stained with coffee and ketchup. She tried to smile when she got home, but sometimes I saw it, the weight she carried, even when she tried to hide it behind jokes or hugs. I remember once asking her, "Mom, are we poor?" She was quiet for a second, like she was trying to find a softer word, something that didn't sting. Then she smiled and said, "We're rich in love, baby, and that's what matters most." I didn't press further, but I noticed the way her hands shook when she opened bills. I noticed the way she'd skip dinner and say she wasn't hungry, even when her stomach growled. Our little apartment above the laundromat was falling apart. The heat barely worked, and the windows rattled when the wind picked up. But Mom decorated it with old books, hand-me-down curtains, and picture frames from the thrift store. Somehow, she made it feel like home. I'd sit by the window most evenings, waiting for her to come home. Sometimes, if I was lucky, she'd bring leftover fries or a small chocolate milkshake someone didn't finish. And on the rare nights we both had time, we'd snuggle under a blanket, watch cartoons, and laugh like the world wasn't closing in around us. She never let me see her cry, but I knew she did. I could hear it sometimes from behind the bathroom door, late at night when she thought I was asleep. The muffled sobs, the prayers whispered into a towel, the kind of pain no kid should have to overhear. Still, I never saw her give up. She was a fighter, my hero, my mom. And even though I was small, even though I couldn't understand it all yet, I knew one thing. It was her and me against the world. And no matter what came next, I'd do whatever it took to keep us together. Even if that meant selling lemonade on the sidewalk. It was a Wednesday. Mom had a cough that wouldn't quit, but she kept brushing it off. "Just the flu," she said, forcing a smile. But that morning, she fainted in the kitchen. I dialed 911 with shaking hands. At the hospital, the air was too cold and the waiting room too quiet. Hours passed before a doctor finally called me in. I held my breath. "It's stage 3, he said. "She has cancer." I didn't understand it all, but I saw her face. I saw her grip the edge of the bed like the world was tilting. No tears. Just silence. That kind again, the heavy one. Treatment would be expensive, very expensive. Mom didn't have insurance, just a worn-out body and bills already piled high. On the ride home, she stared out the window. "Don't worry, baby," she whispered, more to herself than me. "We'll figure it out." But I knew she didn't believe it. Not really. Something inside me cracked wide open that day. I couldn't lose her. I wouldn't. So I decided right then I'd do something, anything. And that's when the idea hit me. A lemonade stand. Simple, stupid maybe, but it was all I had. And it was going to be the beginning of everything. I didn't sleep much that night. My mind kept racing. Hospital bills, prescriptions, chemo. I didn't even know what chemo was until I Googled it under the blanket with my old tablet. The costs were insane. I was 9. I couldn't get a job, couldn't drive, couldn't even cook a meal without Mom helping me reach the top shelf. But I could sell lemonade. We had this little folding table in the garage. I pulled it out, wiped off the dust, and dragged it to the sidewalk in front of our house. I made a crooked cardboard sign with a red marker that bled through the letters. Lemonade for Mom, $1 a cup. The first morning was rough. I only had 1 lemon, some sugar, and the cheapest paper cups we had left in the kitchen drawer. I squeezed the lemon into a plastic jug, added tap water, stirred it with a spoon that was too big for the pitcher, and poured out the first glass. And then I waited, it felt like forever, before a car finally pulled up. Mrs. Patterson, the librarian. She got out, looked at the sign, and asked, "For your mom?" I nodded. She handed me a $5 bill and didn't take the cup. "Keep the change, sweetheart." That moment changed everything. By the end of the day, I had $17 and a full heart. People didn't just stop for lemonade, and they stopped to care. Word started to spread, and I realized I wasn't just selling lemonade, I was selling hope. And hope, I'd learned, is something people are more willing to buy than anything else. By day 3, I was running out of lemons, fast. But something strange started happening. First, it was Mr. Green, the mechanic. He pulled up in his greasy overalls, reached into a brown paper bag, and handed me 6 bright lemons. I thought you could use a refill," he said with a wink. He didn't even buy a cup, just gave me the lemons and walked off. Then came Ms. Hill from the bakery. She brought a tray of leftover cookies and said, "Maybe offer these with the lemonade. Might bring more folks." I didn't even ask her. She just did it. Word had officially gotten around. It was like the whole town decided. This little boy, standing behind that wobbly table, trying to help his mom, he's not doing this alone anymore. People didn't just stop by. They brought friends. They brought cameras. One lady from the local newspaper asked me, "Why lemonade?" I shrugged. "Because it's all I know how to make, and I wanted to do something." That quote ended up in the paper the next day. Because I wanted to do something. Joshua, 9 years old. And suddenly, my little sidewalk stand wasn't just about lemonade anymore. It became our stand, the town's stand, for a sick mother and her brave little boy. And I started to believe that maybe, just maybe, we were going to make it. I remember that morning clearly. The sky was still sleepy, and I was setting up my stand like usual. I had a new sign now. It read, "Every cup helps my mom fight cancer." Just as I was placing the jar of sugar on the table, as a black SUV pulled up, out stepped a woman in heels and sunglasses. She introduced herself as Amanda, a reporter from the local news channel. She smiled and said, "I've heard about you, Joshua. Mind if I do a quick interview?" I nodded, nervous but excited. She asked about my mom, the lemonade, the town. I spoke from the heart. I didn't know how to sound polished or professional. I just told the truth. That night, they aired the story during the 6 o'clock news. I watched it sitting on the edge of the couch, Mom beside me, her head wrapped in a scarf from chemo, her hand holding mine like it always did. By the next morning, everything changed. The line outside our house wrapped around the block. People I'd never seen before drove from the next town over, and even farther. Some just handed me $20 bills and walked away. Some cried, some prayed with Mom right there on the porch. And then the donations started online. One woman from New Jersey emailed me and said, "I saw your story on Facebook. My mom had cancer too. I'm sending you $100. Keep going, sweet boy." We didn't even have a proper donation set up, just Mom's old Venmo. But it worked. By the end of that week, I had raised over $12,000. It felt like we'd been swept into a dream. And through it all, Mom would smile, that tired but proud smile, and say, "Joshua, you've turned lemons into something no one could have imagined." I didn't fully get what she meant back then, but looking back now, I do. It was a Thursday, hot, sticky, and busier than usual. The lemonade line stretched all the way down the street, and I was pouring cup after cup like my life depended on it. My hands were sticky with sugar, and I was almost out of ice. That's when I saw him. A tall man in a faded blue baseball cap, jeans worn at the knees, and heavy boots. He didn't look like the others. No fancy camera, no phone out for pictures, no big smile. Just quiet eyes and a look like he was searching for something or someone. He waited his turn. When he finally stepped up, he didn't ask for a lemonade. Instead, he looked straight at me and said, "Your mom raised you right." I didn't know what to say. I just nodded. He handed me a small white envelope. "Give this to her," he said, then walked off before I could even open my mouth. I stood there for a second, confused. Then I ran inside. "Mom," I said, handing her the envelope. She was lying on the couch, resting between chemo treatments, a soft scarf wrapped around her head. She opened the envelope slowly. Inside was a check for $5,000. No name, no note, just a line on the memo that read, "For your fight. From someone who sees you." We both stared at it for a while in silence. Then Mom cried. Not the kind of crying I was used to, the quiet midnight tears she thought I didn't see. This was different. This was release. This was someone finally lifting a piece of the weight she carried. I didn't cry. I just held her hand tighter. That day, I learned something that would stick with me for the rest of my life. You never know who's watching. You never know who cares. But kindness, when it lands in the right moment, it changes everything. And that man in the blue cap, I never saw him again. But I think about him often. Sometimes I wonder if he'd been through something like we had. Or maybe he'd just seen enough life to know what it means to help a stranger without needing credit. Either way, I'll never forget him. The next few days felt lighter. Not easier, but lighter. Like someone had opened a window and let a little air back into the room. That $5,000 check didn't fix everything, but it helped cover a couple hospital bills and bought Mom some stronger medication that eased her nausea. Still, life didn't magically become sunshine and smooth roads. That weekend, the sky turned black. Literally. Thunder cracked and rain came down like the clouds were mad at the earth. I stood in front of my lemonade stand, plastic tarp flapping behind me, my shoes soaked through. People told me to pack up and go home. A few even laughed, but I didn't leave. I stood there in the downpour with my Mom's Lemonade for Love sign sagging and the cups stacked on a damp tray. Because I knew this wasn't just about lemonade. This was about showing up even when it's hard, even when no one's watching. I think that's what being strong really means. That day, only 3 people came by. One of them bought 6 cups, probably just because he felt sorry for me. But that was $12 more toward Mom's chemo, and it was worth every shiver and raindrop. Later that night, Mom asked, "Why didn't you come in when the storm started?" I looked at her, wrapped in blankets on the couch, pale but smiling at me with tired eyes. "Because cancer doesn't stop when it rains," I said. She went quiet, then pulled me close, like she was afraid I'd disappear if she didn't hold on tight. That night, for the first time in a long while, I slept deeply, because even though the world was still heavy, I knew I was stronger than the storm. The truth is, storms come for all of us. Sometimes they're loud and wet and angry. Other times, they're invisible and live inside your chest. But if you can stand through them, even just once, you start to believe you can do it again. And I was starting to believe. 2 days after the storm, something unexpected happened. I was restocking my little stand, new cups, fresh lemons, a bigger sign that said, "Help my mom beat cancer," when a woman with a fancy camera approached. She introduced herself as Kendra, a local reporter for the town's newspaper. She'd heard about a boy with a lemonade stand and a heart of gold. Apparently, one of the 3 people who stopped by during the rain had taken a picture of me soaked to the bone and shared it on Facebook. I didn't even know it had happened. The post had gone viral, at least in our small town kind of way. It had a few thousand shares and a bunch of comments like, "What a brave little guy. I'd drive across the county to buy that lemonade. Someone help this kid and his mom." Kendra asked to interview me. I was nervous. My shirt was wrinkled and I didn't know what to say on camera. But then I looked at Mom, who had managed to get dressed and sat in a chair nearby, watching with soft eyes. And I remembered why I was doing this. So I told Kendra everything. About the diagnosis, about the hospital bills, about the $30 goal that had turned into a town movement. I talked about the storm and standing in the rain. I talked about how much I loved my mom. That night, the local news ran the story. Then a radio station picked it up. Then someone from a national news outlet shared it on Twitter. By the next morning, there were 10 people in line at my lemonade stand. Some came from towns I'd never heard of. A woman drove 2 hours with her daughter just to buy a cup. And people weren't just handing me money, they were handing me envelopes, donations, notes, hugs. A small bakery offered to sell my lemonade on weekends and give me half the profits. A farmer dropped off crates of lemons for free. I didn't even realize the impact until Mom started crying while scrolling on her phone. She turned the screen to me. A GoFundMe someone had started on our behalf had raised $38,000 in a single day. 38,000. I couldn't breathe for a moment. I just stared at that number. We weren't rich. We still had a hard road ahead. But that money meant my mom could get treatment without deciding between chemo and rent. It meant she could stop skipping pills to stretch prescriptions. It meant I didn't have to grow up faster than I already had. I ran outside, looked up at the sky, and just yelled, "Thank you." Not sure who I was thanking. God, the world, the internet, that man who shared the photo, maybe all of them. Because kindness, like lemonade, spreads fast when it's made with love. That day, I sold out of every cup. But more than that, I realized people are still good. That strangers care. That sometimes, when the world feels cold, it sends you warm hands to hold you up. And that little stand, it wasn't just a lemonade stand anymore. It was hope in a cup. It was a Tuesday. I remember because the school lunch had been meatloaf, and I hated meatloaf. But that day, I didn't care. I couldn't focus on anything. My palms were sweaty, and my knees bounced under the table, until Mrs. Gibbons told me to sit still. Because that afternoon, we had an appointment. Mom's appointment. The big one. We'd raised enough through donations and lemonade sales to afford a more aggressive treatment plan. The hospital had accepted a reduced rate because of the need of attention, and with help from a charity, Mom had completed her last round of chemo. Now we were going in to hear what came next, the results. The nurse called us in, and I held Mom's hand tighter than ever. Her fingers were cold and thin, but she gave me that same soft smile she always did, the one that tried to shield me from everything hard. Dr. Bennett came in, wearing a navy tie and a serious expression. He sat down across from us, flipped open a file, and glanced at my mom. Then he looked at me. "Joshua," he said, "you've been quite the hero, haven't you?" I shrugged, looking at the floor. Dr. Bennett smiled, really smiled, then turned to my mom. "Your scans are clear." For a second, neither of us moved, like our bodies hadn't caught up to our ears. "What?" Mom whispered, as if she was afraid she'd heard it wrong. "The cancer's gone," he said. "You're in remission." I didn't understand every word he used, but I understood enough. Gone. Remission. Clear. Mom burst into tears, and I did too. We hugged so tight that my lemonade-stained shirt soaked up her tears, and I didn't care. I would have bottled that hug if I could. Sold that as lemonade. Because it was pure joy. Dr. Bennett let us have our moment, then said something I'll never forget. "Joshua," he said, "you didn't just help your mom financially. You gave her the will to fight. That kind of love? It's medicine too." That night, I told everyone at the stand. They cried with us. People I barely knew pulled me into their arms. Someone brought balloons. Someone else brought a chocolate cake that said, "Go Mom," in yellow frosting. I kept thinking back to the first day I squeezed lemons into a plastic jug. The day I taped up that little cardboard sign. Back when I thought $30 was a mountain I'd never climb. Now my mom was alive. Really alive, and I felt bigger than my age. Not because I had grown, but because I had given. And in giving, I'd gotten the greatest gift of all. More time with her. That night, I sat next to her on the couch. Our hands clasped like always. She kissed the top of my head and whispered, "You saved me, baby." But I knew the truth. We saved each other. The summer breeze was softer now, no longer filled with the tension of worry or the sharp tang of fear. It carried the scent of sun-warmed grass, a hint of citrus, and something I hadn't smelled in a long time. Peace! After the news of Mom's remission, I thought things might quiet down, that life would slip back into the ordinary. But something unexpected happened. People didn't stop coming. At first it was neighbors, stopping by just to say hello, to tell us how inspired they'd been by our story. Then it was people from nearby towns, bringing their kids to meet the boy who saved his mom. Some even asked me to speak at schools or events. Me, a 9-year-old, with sticky fingers and lemonade on my shoes. But I realized they didn't come because I was special. They came because the story gave them hope. Because in a world full of problems, a little boy with a plastic jug and a dream had done something good. I didn't stop the lemonade stand, not entirely. I didn't need the money for hospital bills anymore, but we decided to use the earnings for something else. We started a small fund, the Lemon Drop Foundation. Every dollar from the stand now went into helping other families like ours. Moms fighting illness, kids scared and confused, people who needed just a little help, a little hope to keep going. It started small, paying for gas cards, groceries, one family's rent when the dad lost his job. But then others joined in. One of the local restaurants held a fundraiser. A lady from the city offered to match donations. My school even had a Lemonade Spirit Day, where everyone wore yellow and brought coins to donate. It was wild, and it was bigger than me. Mom had more energy now. She laughed more. She even went back to school online, working toward her degree in nursing. She said she wanted to be the kind of nurse who could hold someone's hand the way hers had been held, who could say, "You're not alone," and mean it. Sometimes I'd catch her watching me at the stand, arms crossed, smile wide, eyes shining. "You built this," she'd say. But I'd shake my head. No, we did. And that was the truth. People ask me sometimes, "Joshua, what's next for you?" I don't always know. I'm still just a kid. I still eat too much candy and forget my homework sometimes. But I do know this. I learned that hard times don't have to break you. I learned that love is louder than fear, and I learned that even a little lemonade can change someone's life if it's poured with heart. So I'll keep pouring, keep helping, keep walking forward with Mom's hand in mine, and the taste of sun and sugar and possibility on my tongue. Because this isn't just a story about what we went through. It's a story about what we became, together. And that's a legacy worth leaving behind. It started with a plastic table and a cardboard sign. Now it was becoming something so much more. After the local news ran a follow-up on our story, things snowballed again. This time, it wasn't just people donating or dropping by. Schools from other states began emailing us, teachers asking if their students could start their own lemonade, stands to help other families in need, under our name. Lemon Drop Kids, they called themselves. We didn't have a team. We didn't even have a proper website at the time. But I had Mom, and she had her laptop, and together we figured it out. We created a simple site, shared our story, and gave step-by-step guides on how any kid, anywhere, could start their own stand, not just to raise money, but to raise kindness. The coolest part? It worked. One week, we get photos from a group of third graders in Ohio who raised $312 for a classmate's mom going through chemo. The next, we get an email from a high schooler in Arizona who built a custom lemonade trailer and raised $2,000 in one weekend for their neighbor's medical bills. I was just a boy from a small town, but suddenly, the thing that started as a desperate attempt to save my mom was saving others. Mom always said, when you pour out goodness to the world, it has a way of overflowing back into your life. She wasn't wrong. People started reaching out to support the Lemon Drop Foundation in bigger ways. A local business owner offered to cover printing costs for all our starter kits. A designer friend of Mom's helped build us a proper logo, a bright yellow lemon with a tiny heart in the middle. Someone even helped us get 501c3 status, whatever that meant. Mom was super excited about it, so I figured it was a big deal. And me? I was still running my lemonade stand every Saturday, just like always, only now, I wasn't just selling lemonade. I was selling hope, one cup at a time. Some days I missed how quiet life used to be, before interviews and emails and calls, before the pressure of being the inspirational kid, but then someone would stop by and say, "My son saw your video and started talking to me about doing something kind for his friend." And I'd remember, this wasn't about being seen. It was about making others feel seen. There were still hard days, of course. Mom had checkups every few months that brought back every fear. Sometimes donations dried up, or we'd get emails from families we couldn't help in time. Those days hurt, but we kept going. Because if I've learned anything through all this, it's that you don't need to change the world all at once. You just need to change someone's world, and you can start with one lemon, one stand, one hand reaching out when someone else is falling. It doesn't take much to be a hero, just heart, and maybe a squeeze of citrus. If someone had told 9-year-old me that one day I'd stand on a stage in front of hundreds of people with a microphone and bright lights and all eyes on me, I would have laughed, maybe even cried. I mean, I used to get nervous just raising my hand in class. But here I was, 10 years old, standing behind a podium in the grand ballroom of a hotel downtown, facing a sea of strangers at a charity gala. The same boy who once begged neighbors to buy 50-cent lemonade to save his mom's life was now the guest speaker. "Joshua, just talk like you do at the stand," Mom whispered backstage before I walked out. "Talk from your heart. That's all anyone really wants." I gripped the little note cards I'd written my speech on, my palms sweating. I could hear the buzz of silverware clinking and quiet murmurs as the MC announced my name. And now, Please welcome someone who proves that you're never too young to make a difference. Joshua Miles. Applause, lights, silence. I walked to the center of the stage, my feet feeling like bricks. But then I looked into the crowd and spotted Mom. Front row, hands clasped over her heart. Teary-eyed, but smiling so proud it made my chest warm. So I took a deep breath and spoke. Hi, I'm Joshua. I'm 10 years old, and 2 years ago I thought I was going to lose my mom. The words flowed, shaky at first, but steady as I kept going. I told them about the diagnosis, the stack of bills, the fear, about the first cup of lemonade I sold, and the woman who tipped me $100 and changed everything. I told them how we built something out of nothing, not because we had the money, but because we had to. I didn't start the stand to get on TV or raise thousands. I started it because I wanted my mom to live. You could hear a pin drop. Then I looked around the room and said something I hadn't even planned. And if you're here tonight, maybe it's because you want to help someone live too. A pause. Then, applause. Real, thunderous, stand-up applause. Afterward, people came up to hug me, thank me, ask how they could help. A man slipped a check into my pocket, $5,000 for the foundation. A woman whispered, "You made me believe again." But it wasn't the money or the praise that stuck with me. It was the moment I realized something powerful. My voice mattered, not just my story, but my voice, my truth. And if a scared little boy from a quiet town could get up and speak from the heart, maybe someone else out there would find the courage to do the same. After that night on the stage, something shifted inside me. I wasn't just the kid with the lemonade stand anymore. I was the kid with a voice. And people were listening. A few weeks later, I got a letter in the mail. It wasn't a bill or a thank you card. It was from a school 3 towns over. A teacher had seen the video of my speech online. She said her students watched it in class. And then, get this, they started their own kindness stands. Not just lemonade. Some sold cookies, some gave out handmade bookmarks with motivational quotes. One girl set up a Hugs for Hope corner and raised money for a local animal shelter, all because of my little stand. I remember reading that letter with my mom, and we both just sat there in silence. Then she smiled and said, "You didn't just raise money, Joshua. You lit a spark." That's when the idea hit me. What if I could help other kids build their own lemonade stands, not just to sell lemonade, but to spread hope? I grabbed a notebook and started sketching out plans like I was some kind of young CEO. I called it the Lemonade Promise. A simple kit, free of course, with signs, a how-to guide, and a letter from me telling kids, if I can do it, so can you. Mom helped me put together the first few kits. I emailed schools, community centers, even churches. Some said no. A few ignored me. But the ones who said yes, they went all in. Soon I was helping kids in towns I'd never even been to. Kids who wanted to raise money for their sick siblings, for homeless shelters, for moms like mine. I didn't just feel proud, I felt alive. That summer, we launched a website with the help of a local college student who volunteered her time. Donations started coming in to support the kids. I used every single dollar to print more, ship more, and visit kids who needed help getting started. And every time I saw a child standing behind their little table, nervously offering cups of lemonade to strangers, I saw myself again, scared, hopeful, and full of love. Some of those kids wrote back months later with stories of how they raised hundreds of dollars. Some said they made new friends, some just said they felt seen for the first time. And that's when I knew this wasn't a project, this was a movement. I wasn't just trying to save my mom anymore. I was trying to build a world where no kid felt helpless. where no family felt forgotten, where hope came in the form of a paper cup and a smile. I was no longer just surviving, I was building something bigger than me. It started with a local newspaper article, one of those feel-good Sunday features. A reporter had visited one of the schools that used our lemonade promise kits. They interviewed me, snapped a few pictures of me with some of the kids, and ran it under the headline, "The Boy Who Turned Lemonade into Hope." I thought that was the end of it, but a few days later, my mom's phone started buzzing nonstop. NBC, then CNN, then Good Morning America, and then came The Ellen Show. At first I thought it was a prank. When someone from the show called and said, "We'd love to fly you and your mom out to LA to share your story," I nearly dropped the phone. We'd never flown before. Heck, I'd never even been out of the state. But there we were, a week later, walking into a fancy studio with bright lights and cameras and people rushing around with headsets. My palms were sweaty, and Mom kept squeezing my shoulder. "Just tell the truth," she whispered, "like you always do." When I stepped onto the stage, I saw Ellen smile, the audience clapping, and something in me clicked. I wasn't scared, not anymore. I was just ready. I told the world about how I started the lemonade stand because I thought I might lose my mom, and how a single act of kindness from a stranger changed everything. I told them about the lemonade promise, the kids across the country, and how I wanted to keep spreading hope, one stand at a time. When I finished, the whole room stood up and clapped. Ellen hugged me. Then she smiled and said, "We have a surprise." A curtain opened behind me. There was a giant check, $50,000, donated by a company that had seen the story and wanted to support the movement. I couldn't speak. I just looked at Mom. She was crying. Happy tears, the kind I hadn't seen since before she got sick. That moment didn't change who I was, but it amplified what I believed in. The story went viral. Interviews, press, radio shows, podcasts. Everyone wanted to know how a little boy turned pain into purpose. But I kept saying the same thing. It wasn't me. It was love. It was my mom. It was every stranger who said yes when they could have said no. And still, even with all that attention, I made sure to stay grounded. I still helped kids launch new stands. I still handwrote thank you letters. I still poured lemonade every Saturday when I was home. Because fame wasn't the goal. Impact was. And if sharing my story meant one more kid believed they could change their world, even a little, then I'd keep telling it, over and over again. They say a single drop creates ripples that reach far beyond where it fell. I didn't understand that fully until the letters started coming. It began with one from a boy in Kansas named Eli. He wrote, "My mom has cancer too. I didn't think I could do anything, but I saw your story and started my own lemonade stand. I raised $86 this weekend. It's not a lot, but it's a start." Then came another, a girl from Ohio, Emily. "I used to feel invisible, but after seeing you on TV, I decided to stand out for something good. I organized a fundraiser at my school. We're donating to families at our local hospital." Letters, emails, drawings from kids, handwritten notes from elderly people who had seen me on the news and said they felt hope again. Teachers telling me they used my story as a class project about empathy and perseverance. I was just a boy selling lemonade. But somehow, this little act, this need to save my mom, had lit a fire in people I'd never even meet. Hospitals began inviting us to speak. Schools started holding Lemonade Promise weeks. Kids created pledge boards and signed their names, promising to help someone in need. One school even replaced their annual talent show with a kindness fair. Everywhere I looked, I saw more lemonade stands. Not because it was trendy, but because people were waking up to what was already inside them, the desire to do something meaningful. And then one day we were contacted by a man named Mr. Langston. He ran a foundation that helped fund community-based youth programs. He said, "I want to support your dream, but I don't want to change your mission. You've got the heart. We just want to give it wings." That's when we officially launched the Lemonade Promise Foundation. With their help, we were able to provide starter kits to thousands of kids across the country, free of cost. We partnered with hospitals, schools, and nonprofits. We created a mentorship program pairing young Lemonade leaders with local business owners. We even set up a small grant program for kids who wanted to scale their idea beyond just a weekend stand. The best part? It wasn't about me anymore. It was about us, all of us. The single moms who worked 2 jobs and still packed lunches, the dads who drove their kids to every fundraiser, the kids who showed up, rain or shine, holding posters they made with crayons and hope. We were creating a culture of compassion, one cup at a time. And somewhere in the middle of all that noise and excitement, I remembered how it began. A folding table, a picture, a handwritten sign, and fear in my chest. Now, that fear had become fuel, because every kid that wrote to me, every family that found support, every moment someone chose kindness over convenience, that was the ripple. And I was just the drop. I never imagined I'd need a suit and tie at 11 years old. And I definitely didn't imagine I'd wear one while standing behind a podium in Washington, D.C., looking out over a sea of people in crisp suits and name tags, their eyes fixed on me, just a kid from a small town who sold lemonade to save his mom. It all started with an email from a congresswoman's office. They were hosting a youth impact forum, an annual event where kids across the country who had made a difference were invited to speak. Someone had submitted my story, and somehow I was selected to represent youth entrepreneurship and community action. I thought it was a mistake. I was just Joshua. I still forgot to tie my shoes sometimes. I still spilled cereal, but they insisted. So my mom and I packed our bags and flew to Washington. We had never been on a plane before. Mom was nervous, but I could see her trying not to show it. For me, I practiced my speech for days, in hotel rooms, on sidewalks, in front of the bathroom mirror. My voice would crack sometimes. I'd get nervous and forget a word. But I kept going. When the day finally arrived, I stepped onto the stage, my hands shaking, but my heart steady. I looked out over the crowd and took a deep breath. Good morning. My name is Joshua Thompson, and I sold lemonade to save my mom's life. I told them about the hospital bills, about the folding table, about the strangers who became family, and the town that rallied behind a kid with a dream. I told them about the ripple effect, how one act of love turned into a wave of kindness across the country. I paused, looked straight into the cameras. You don't have to be rich or powerful or grown up. You just have to care enough to try. That's what I did. That's what thousands of kids are doing now. Imagine what this country could be if every kid knew their voice mattered, if every adult helped them believe it. The room was quiet for a moment, and then applause. Loud, real. Some people even stood. I saw my mom in the front row, her eyes full of tears, clapping like I'd just won the Super Bowl. After the speech, people came up to us, senators, advocates, entrepreneurs. They asked questions, they handed me business cards, they told me they were inspired. But what stuck with me most was a woman from the Department of Education. She knelt down beside me and said, "Joshua, you've reminded us why we do this. Thank you for showing grown-ups how to lead." Later that evening, back in our hotel, Mom wrapped me in the biggest hug and whispered, "Your voice is powerful, baby. Don't ever forget that." That night, I didn't feel like a kid who sold lemonade. I felt like someone who could move mountains. And maybe, just maybe, I had already started. They say healing is a straight line. You get sick, you fight, you heal. But that's a lie. Healing doesn't follow neat lines. It loops, it stumbles, it gets quiet before it gets better. And I learned that the hard way, through watching my mom fight silently, fiercely, every single day. After Washington, the attention didn't fade right away. More people reached out, donations trickled in, local news ran updates. I got letters from other kids who wanted to start their own lemonade stands, not just for money, but to make change. Some sent pictures. One even mailed me a hand-drawn Lemonade Hero comic, where I was a superhero with citrus blasting powers. I still have it. But behind our front door, it was quieter. Mom was still tired. Her energy came and went like waves. One week, she'd be walking around with music on and laughter in her voice. The next, she could barely get out of bed. Her treatment had worked. But treatment doesn't mean it's over. The doctors were hopeful, yes, but they were also cautious. Mom called it remission, but I noticed how she never said forever. She had more checkups now, more follow-ups, more tests, and sometimes she didn't tell me everything. I'd come home from school and see a new bandage on her arm or overhear her whispering on the phone with her doctor, voice hushed and tight. When I asked, she'd smile too quickly and say, "Just routine stuff, baby." I knew better. I didn't push. There's a kind of strength in pretending everything's fine when it isn't, and sometimes that strength is what gets you through the hard days. I did what I could. I took over more chores. I made sure she ate. I became her unofficial appointment manager, setting reminders on our fridge calendar with big smiley faces. And sometimes we just sat together. No words, no questions. Just the sound of the clock ticking and our hearts beating next to each other. The town helped too. Our neighbors would bring by soup or run errands for her. The church gave us rides when I had school events. And the clinic started checking in on her more often, free of charge. One night, months later, she and I were watching old home videos. She paused one where I was just a toddler, sitting in a bathtub, with shampoo bubbles on my head. She looked at me and said, "I used to wonder what kind of man you'd become." I smiled and said, "What do you mean used to?" She took my hand. "I already know now." That hit different. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic, but it was healing. And for the first time in a long time, I felt peace. Not because everything was perfect, but because we were still us. Still fighting, still loving, still here. You'd think that once my mom started getting better, things would settle down, that I'd go back to being just a kid. School, homework, maybe a part-time job eventually. A normal life. But something inside me had changed. It wasn't just about lemonade anymore. Not really. That stand had opened doors I didn't even know existed. People listened to me. I had a voice, and I'd seen how one small act of love, a kid with a fold-up table and a pitcher, could ripple across a whole town, even across the country. So I started thinking bigger. I wanted other kids to feel like they could do something too. Kids who had sick parents, kids who felt powerless, kids like me, who weren't rich, who didn't have connections, but had heart. That's when I came up with the idea for the Lemonade Project. Yeah, cheesy name, but it fit. The idea was simple. Help kids set up their own stands, and whatever money they raise, they could use it to help their own families, or donate it to someone in their community who needed it more. I made it flexible on purpose. Not every kid had a mom in the hospital, but almost every kid knew someone who needed a little help. I pitched the idea to my principal first. She loved it. Then we took it to the school board. They gave us one Saturday a month to set up stands outside the school parking lot. Then more schools joined. Then a local grocery chain offered to sponsor our supplies. Free lemons, cups, and sugar. A tech guy from our town helped us build a basic website. Before I even finished middle school, the Lemonade Project had gone statewide. By then, I wasn't just some kid who sold lemonade to save his mom. I was getting invited to speak at community centers, youth groups, even conferences. I wasn't a polished speaker or anything. I just tell my story, raw and real. I talk about fear, about hope, about how I felt like I had nothing left, and how sometimes doing something tiny with love behind it is all it takes to flip your world upside down. Every time I spoke, I'd look into the crowd and find at least one kid like me, quiet, watching, but their eyes wide, like they just realized they weren't alone. That made everything worth it. One night, I got an email. It was from a girl in Iowa. She was 11. Her mom had been laid off, and her little brother needed surgery. She wrote, "I don't have a lot, but I have a sidewalk. I'm gonna try." She sent a picture 2 weeks later, her, standing next to a little table, big handmade sign, proud and beaming. She raised $147 that day. She didn't change the world. She changed her world. And that's all I ever wanted to do. A few years later, I stood on a small stage in our town's community center. The same stage where they used to hold bingo nights and school band concerts. This time, though, it was packed. Not with music or games, but with people gathered to celebrate something I never expected. The 5-year anniversary of the Lemonade Project. There were kids from neighboring towns, teachers, nurses, single moms, even a few city council members, and right there in the front row, her hand gripping mine the whole time, was my mom. Healthy, glowing, and alive. I hadn't written a speech. I rarely did. I just looked out at the crowd and said, "I started this whole thing because I was scared. I thought I was going to lose my mom, and I didn't know what else to do except make lemonade." Some people chuckled. "But here's the truth," I said, my voice steady. "I thought I was just selling drinks. What I was really doing was learning how to fight for something I loved." There was a pause. Not for applause, but the kind of silence that means people are really listening. That's what this project is about. It's not about the money or the press or the attention. It's about waking up every day and asking yourself, how can I help with what I have right now? Then I looked at my mom. She taught me that, even when she was sick, even when she was hurting, she never stopped being my strength. She showed me what courage looks like. After that, I announced a new part of the project, the Lemonade Scholarship Fund. A small grant we'd started with donations, given each year to kids who had shown extraordinary kindness or resilience during hard times. Not for the smartest kid, not for the most popular, but for the ones who refused to give up. That night, after the celebration, my mom and I walked home slowly. "You did good, baby," she said, her voice catching a little. "You did so good." I looked at her. "We did good." In many ways, it had all come full circle. But deep inside, I knew this wasn't the end. This was just the beginning of something bigger than either of us had imagined, because once you've been broken and had to build yourself back with bare hands and borrowed hope, you never forget. And once you've seen what even one kid can do with a table, a dream, and a few lemons, you believe anything is possible. I used to think lemonade was just a summer drink. Sweet, simple, temporary, but it became the symbol of something so much deeper in my life. Survival, courage, and eventually purpose. Years passed. The Lemonade Project grew beyond our little town. Other kids picked up the torch, setting up their own stands, not just for hospital bills, but for community libraries, for fire victims, for friends in need. And every time I saw one of those crooked, hand-drawn signs or wobbly fold-out tables with pictures of sticky lemonade, my heart swelled because I saw me in them. At 21, I published a book. It wasn't fancy or best-selling, but it told my story. Honestly, messily, truthfully. Lemonade Stand: How a 9-year-old saved his mom and found his mission. That's what I called it. Schools started inviting me to speak. Moms would message me on Facebook saying their sons had read it and felt less alone. At 25, I opened the first Lemonade Center, a safe space for single parents and their children. We offered everything from tutoring and job coaching to hot meals and counseling. I walked through that building like I was walking through a dream I never dared to dream as a kid. And my mom, she became the heart of the place. She'd greet people at the door, remembering every name, every baby's birthday, every story. Some nights, I'd find her sitting with a struggling mom, just holding her hand and saying, "I've been there. You're gonna make it." That was our power. Not perfection, not money, not status. Just being there. Showing up with empathy, with experience, and with open arms. The truth is, life didn't magically become easy. There were setbacks, disappointments, days I still felt like that scared 9-year-old boy watching his mom fade in a hospital bed. But the difference now? I knew who I was, I knew what I stood for, and I knew why it all happened. One evening, years later, I sat on our porch while the sun dipped low, painting the sky in lemon and lavender. My mom rocked slowly beside me, her gray streaks glinting gold in the light. "Can you believe it?" I asked. She smiled. Every bit of it. And for once, the silence between us didn't ache. It glowed, warm, full. Because when you fight for love, when you pour everything into something bigger than your fear, you don't just survive. You leave a legacy. And mine started with 2 things: a sick mother and a pitcher of lemonade.